There's something about old Hollywood that modern stars just can't touch. The way they moved, the way they looked at the camera, every glance, every gesture was pure seduction. These weren't just attractive people. They were magnetic, unforgettable, and completely in control of their presence. Whether it was a slow-burning stare, sultry voice, or the kind of smile that could stop time, these stars knew how to hold your attention without saying a word. In this video, we're counting down 16 of the sexiest actors and actresses from classic Hollywood, the ones who still make the screen feel electric no matter how many decades have passed. Some were smooth and elegant, others dark and dangerous, but all of them had that rare, undeniable spark. Watch closely, because one of them might stir something you didn't expect. Gene Tierney, beauty that felt like silence. There was a stillness in Gene Tierney that made everything around her seem louder. Her beauty wasn't warm or playful. It was precise, quiet, and arresting, the kind that seemed carved rather than born. When she appeared on screen, she didn't have to say a word. Her face alone told you there was more happening beneath the surface, something fragile, something potentially dangerous. Watching her was like standing in a silent room just before a storm breaks. In Laura, 1944, she played the title role as if she were a memory rather than a person. That was Tierney's gift. She made you question what was real. Her characters didn't beg for your attention. They already had it. She could hold a scene with the slightest movement, letting silence do more work than any monologue. While other actresses of the era leaned into charm or glamour, Tierney leaned away. She gave you space to project your own desire, then stayed just far enough out of reach to keep you wanting more. There was something haunting in her restraint, like a door that never fully opens. She embodied elegance but never safety, always that faint hint of mystery, of something held back. Her allure wasn't just physical, it was atmospheric. She was the still water you couldn't see the bottom of, and that tension, between the surface and the unknown, was what made her unforgettable. Gene Tierney didn't seduce in the usual ways. She left you wondering why you couldn't look away. John Garfield, the spark with rough edges. John Garfield didn't have the polish of a studio-groomed leading man, and that was exactly what made him irresistible. He stepped onto the screen like someone who didn't belong there, too real, too raw, yet completely impossible to ignore. There was a charge in the way he moved, a kind of restless energy that made every moment feel like it might tip into something dangerous or tender, depending on the second. What set Garfield apart was the way he carried contradiction. He had the hands of a fighter and the eyes of someone who'd already lost something. That tension between toughness and vulnerability wasn't put on, it felt lived in. You could see it in body and soul. The postman always rings twice, and humoresque. He didn't have to play a man torn between desire and consequence. He was that man. And unlike many of his contemporaries, he didn't try to hide the cracks. He let them show. Garfield brought a kind of heat to the screen that wasn't based on charm or smooth lines. It was something more urgent, more instinctive. He didn't seduce by trying, he seduced by burning. You watched him and felt like you were witnessing something private, maybe even forbidden. He didn't shine in the traditional sense. He smoldered. And that slow, burning intensity, never too polished, never too safe, is what made him unforgettable. Linda Darnell, fire wrapped in velvet. Linda Darnell didn't ask for the camera's attention, she absorbed it. With deep, almond-shaped eyes and a voice that sounded like it had already been whispered in the dark, she had the kind of presence that made scenes feel warmer, more dangerous, and more alive. There was always something glowing behind her, not just beauty, but heat. Watching her was like standing too close to a fire you weren't sure you should touch. Her performances carried a tension between softness and intensity. In A Letter to Three Wives and Forever Amber, she played women who understood the power of their allure but wore it like silk, never loud, never forced. She let you watch her fall in love, make mistakes, and take risks, all while holding on to a dignity that felt unshakable. Even when her characters were vulnerable, she never felt weak. There was strength in her stillness and danger in her calm. What made Darnell truly captivating wasn't just how she looked, though she was undeniably one of the most striking women of her time. It was the way she made desire feel complicated. Her gaze could say yes, no, and don't you dare stop looking all at once. She gave the impression that she was holding something back, not out of fear but control. And that control made her irresistible. Linda Darnell didn't just light up the screen. She flickered, flared, and left shadows in her wake. Cornel Wilde, the body knew before the words did. Cornel Wilde didn't enter a scene, he charged into it. Athletic, graceful, and always carrying a sense of purpose in the way he moved, he brought a physicality to the screen that felt almost modern. While others played suave or mysterious, Wilde embodied a different kind of appeal, raw, agile, and quietly fearless. He looked like a man who could leap off a horse, fight off a dozen men, and still have the breath to say something devastatingly romantic before the credits rolled. But he wasn't just muscle and movement. There was a precision in his performances that suggested discipline, intelligence, and depth beneath the surface. In films like Leave Her to Heaven and Naked Prey, he played men pushed to extremes, emotionally and physically, yet never lost control. That balance made him magnetic, a man who could explode with action or simply stand still and let the tension build in his silence. His appeal wasn't in mystery or brooding, it was in clarity. He didn't hide. He didn't linger in shadows. He let you see exactly what he was, and that honesty only made him more captivating. You could trust him, but you still wanted to follow him into danger. Cornel Wilde's sex appeal came from presence, the kind you feel before he speaks, the kind that makes you sit up straighter without realizing why. He didn't just command the screen. He moved through it like he owned the air itself. Dolores Del Rio, elegance carved in shadow. Dolores Del Rio didn't just carry beauty, she carried legend. There was something ancient in the way she held herself, something that felt less like a starlet and more like a figure out of a myth. With her sculpted features, perfect posture, and haunting calm, she brought a kind of elegance to the screen that didn't beg for attention, it commanded it. She was luminous without trying to shine. Her allure wasn't wrapped in flirtation or drama. It was quieter than that. It came through in stillness, in the way she could hold a glance just a second too long, letting it drift into something more meaningful. In Ramona, Bird of Paradise, and later in Maria Candelaria, she radiated self-possession. She didn't need to seduce with words or gestures. Her presence alone was an answer to a question you didn't know you were asking. Unlike many of her contemporaries, Del Rio's beauty was never played for spectacle. It was spiritual, regal, untouchable, and that distance only made her more fascinating. She seemed to carry secrets with her, not in a way that invited you in, but in a way that made you want to keep watching, hoping for just one more clue. There are stars you remember for their roles, and others you remember for how they made you feel. Dolores Del Rio was the latter. She didn't just perform, she haunted. And even now, her image lingers like a dream half-remembered but never fully lost. And Sheridan, the kind of woman who already knew you wanted her. And Sheridan didn't play coy. She didn't flutter her lashes or pretend to be surprised by attention. She walked into the frame like someone who'd been watched her entire life, and had stopped pretending she didn't notice. Nicknamed the Oomph Girl in the 1930s, she had the kind of sex appeal that didn't ask for permission. It met you head-on, unafraid and fully aware of its power. Her allure wasn't delicate, it was direct. In films like Angels with Dirty Faces, They Drive by Night, and The Man Who Came to Dinner, Sheridan delivered her lines with a bite, a wink, or a shrug, depending on how much patience she had left. She had the rare ability to come off both accessible and untouchable. She looked like someone you could talk to, but only if she decided you were worth her time, and if she smiled, you'd feel like you'd won something. What made Sheridan unforgettable wasn't just her looks, though she was striking, with wide-set eyes and a mouth that always looked moments away from either a laugh or a comeback. It was her attitude. She had nothing to prove. She didn't chase romance or attention. She expected it. In an era full of women trained to be alluring in soft focus, and Sheridan stood out by being solid, real, and impossible to intimidate. She didn't flirt. She dared you. And most of the time, you said yes before you even knew what the question was. Louis Jordan, every word a caress, every glance a question. Louis Jordan didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He didn't need to chase or conquer. He simply entered a room, and suddenly, everything seemed quieter. With his impeccable posture, soft French accent, and eyes that never revealed quite enough, he made charm feel effortless. His appeal wasn't about force or fire, it was about control. And for those who watched him, that restraint was more seductive than anything explicit could ever be. In Gigi, Letter from an Unknown Woman, and The Paradigm Case, Jordan played men who knew the rules of attraction and when to break them. He could be polished and aloof one moment, then devastatingly tender the next. His performances were laced with tension, the kind that hums just beneath the surface, the kind that keeps you leaning forward, waiting for something to slip. But it never quite does, and that's what made him dangerous. There was something old world about him, not just in his manners or looks, but in the way he made seduction feel like conversation. You could imagine him undoing someone's defenses with a quiet comment, a brush of the hand, a look held half a second too long. He wasn't trying to impress you. He was inviting you into his rhythm. And before you realized it, you were already speaking his language. Louis Jordan didn't play to the crowd. He played to you, and he always made it feel personal. Simone Simon, sweetness with a shadow behind it. There was a softness to Simone Simon that made you lean in, and a shadow just behind it that made you hesitate. She had the face of an ingenue and the presence of something far more complicated. With her wide, searching eyes and delicate features, she looked like someone who had wandered in from a different kind of film, quieter, darker, more dreamlike. She made even simple gestures feel loaded with meaning, as if she were constantly moving through layers you couldn't see. In Cat People, 1942, her most haunting role, she played desire and fear like two sides of the same breath. You never quite knew what she was thinking, and that uncertainty created a tension that lingered long after the scene ended. She was magnetic not because she performed boldly, but because she didn't. She gave you just enough, and left you wondering what you missed. Simon didn't play seduction as an act. She was the mystery. The kind of woman whose vulnerability didn't make her weak, it made her dangerous. She was quiet but not passive. Her silence suggested a choice, not a void. And behind her delicate voice and childlike beauty, there was something knowing. Something just out of reach. Watching Simone Simon was like reading a sentence that felt familiar, but somehow meant something different each time. She didn't demand attention. She unsettled it, and in doing so, made herself unforgettable. Farley Granger, too pretty to be safe, too conflicted to forget. Farley Granger had the kind of beauty that wasn't built for toughness. It was delicate, almost startling in its smoothness. In a sea of chiseled jaws and square shoulders, he stood apart. He looked like someone who should have had an easier life, and maybe that's why his performances always carried a hint of restlessness, even when he was smiling. He had the face of a romantic hero, but the soul of someone trying to figure out who he really was. In Hitchcock's Rope and Strangers on a Train, Granger played characters who were caught in moral gray zones, men drawn into danger not by force, but by suggestion. And that's where his allure lived, in the in-between. He didn't radiate danger or dominance. He radiated doubt. That emotional uncertainty, paired with undeniable beauty, made him magnetic in a way that was harder to name. He always looked slightly undone by love, by guilt, by the expectations of others. And somehow, that made him more intimate to watch. His vulnerability wasn't something he revealed. It was something that leaked through, no matter how hard he tried to hold it back. And you couldn't help but feel it. Granger didn't seduce with certainty. He seduced by making you want to take care of him, or at least understand him. And as soon as you thought you did, he was already slipping away. Arlene Dahl, every angle perfected, every glance rehearsed. Arlene Dahl wasn't the kind of beauty you stumble upon. She was the kind you prepared for. With her impossibly red hair, porcelain skin, and feline poise, she looked like she'd been drawn rather than born. Everything about her felt curated, from the tilt of her chin to the way she held a stare a second longer than necessary. She knew she was being watched, and she made the most of it. Dahl's screen presence was a kind of theatrical seduction. In films like Woman's World and Slightly Scarlet, she played women who were hyper-aware of their effect, but never vulgar or reckless with it. Her allure came not from vulnerability, but from control. Every movement seemed intentional, every word dipped in suggestion. She wasn't trying to be accessible. She was commanding the room, even when she barely moved. But what made her so compelling wasn't just her looks, it was the power behind them. She carried herself like someone who had options and didn't mind letting you know that you might not be one of them. There was a coldness in her elegance at times, a sharp edge beneath the velvet. You watched her not just because she was beautiful, but because you wanted to see if anyone could catch her off guard. Few ever did. Arlene Dahl didn't flirt. She performed. And when she was on screen, she made sure you remembered who was in control. Dana Andrews, the silence between the words. Dana Andrews didn't overwhelm you. He didn't swagger or flash a knowing smile. He simply stood there quiet, steady, watching, and somehow, that was more powerful than any performance built on volume. He had the kind of presence that crept up on you slowly until you realized you couldn't take your eyes off him. In films like Laura, The Best Years of Our Lives, and Where the Sidewalk Ends, Andrews played men who carried things, weight, memory, guilt. He never overplayed it. He just let the tension live in his jaw, in the way he held back a word or hesitated before lighting a cigarette. There was a sadness to him, but not a weakness. He looked like a man who had seen too much and decided to say as little as possible about it. That restraint made him magnetic. He never pushed. He let you come to him. He didn't demand attention with physicality or flash. Instead, his appeal was rooted in stillness, in suggestion. You didn't want to follow him because he promised excitement. You followed him because you wanted to understand what he wasn't saying. Dana Andrews made quiet feel dangerous. He made longing feel inevitable. And in a time when many leading men roared across the screen, he showed that sometimes the most seductive thing of all is simply a pause. Jane Greer, danger disguised as stillness. Jane Greer didn't seduce in the traditional sense. She observed. She waited. And by the time you realized what she was doing, it was already too late. With her cool expression, half-lidded eyes, and that quiet, razor-edge voice, she didn't need to raise her volume or bat her lashes. Her power was in her calm, the kind that made you nervous without knowing why. In Out of the Past, she gave us one of the most iconic femmes fatales in Hollywood history. Not because she was loud or exaggerated, but because she was precise. She didn't play a woman pretending to be innocent. She played a woman who had stopped pretending a long time ago. Her every line felt calculated, but never forced, like she was 10 steps ahead and letting you catch up only because it amused her. Greer's sex appeal wasn't performative. It was psychological. She created tension by saying very little and letting your imagination fill in the rest. You weren't just drawn to her, you were studying her, waiting for a slip that never came. There was nothing desperate in her beauty. She was never trying to prove anything. And yet, she was unforgettable. Not for the way she smiled, but for the way she watched. You could feel her reading the room and deciding whether you were worth the trouble. Jane Greer didn't light up the screen. She darkened it and dared you to follow. John Hodiak, the man you didn't see coming. John Hodiak didn't walk into a scene with flash or swagger. He wasn't the loudest man in the room or the smoothest. But he had something far more lasting, presence. He looked like someone who worked with his hands, someone who didn't need to be noticed to be important. And when you finally did notice him, you wondered how you ever looked past him in the first place. With his strong jawline, steady eyes, and no-nonsense demeanor, Hodiak carried a kind of everyday masculinity that felt real. In Lifeboat, Battleground, and Desert Fury, he played men who didn't show off, didn't grandstand, but held a quiet strength that drew people in. His characters didn't chase power. They earned respect by simply standing their ground. That kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself, is rare and deeply attractive. He had a voice that didn't need to rise to be heard, and a stare that said more than the script ever did. There was grit in the way he moved, and decency in the way he held his silence. You got the sense that he'd protect what mattered and walk away from what didn't. And if you were lucky enough to matter, you had his full attention. John Hodiak didn't demand your gaze. But once he had it, you trusted him, and maybe even wanted to follow him anywhere. Gail Russell, like a ghost who wanted to stay. Gail Russell appeared on screen like someone trying not to wake you. There was a hush to her presence, not weakness, but gentleness, as if she were carefully moving through a world that wasn't built for her. Her beauty wasn't flashy or sharp. It was soft-edged and slow-burning, the kind that grew on you with every scene, until you realized she'd completely taken hold of you without raising her voice. In Angel and the Badman and the Uninvited, she played women who seemed to float just slightly above reality, delicate, sensitive, but never empty. There was something behind her eyes that suggested a story she would never fully tell, a sadness she never used for sympathy. You didn't want to protect her, you wanted to understand her. And somehow, that made her even more impossible to forget. Russell had a stillness that didn't come from control, but from deep feeling. She didn't perform emotion, she carried it. Even when surrounded by louder actors or flashier moments, she held her space with quiet power. She made you lean in. Not because she demanded it, but because something about her felt like it could vanish at any moment. Gail Russell didn't dazzle. She lingered. And when the credits rolled, you were left with a feeling you couldn't name, only that something beautiful had passed through, and you were lucky to have seen it. Robert Walker, the smile that never settled. Robert Walker had the kind of face that made people trust him. There was a softness in his features, a boyish charm that suggested sincerity, maybe even safety. But on screen, that warmth rarely stayed for long. Behind the smile was something flickering, a quick shadow across the eyes, a tension in the jaw, a silence that went on just a beat too long. He didn't just play characters. He played instability and made it beautiful. In Strangers on a Train, he delivered one of the most quietly chilling performances of the era, not by shouting or threatening, but by leaning in too close, speaking too gently, and letting the tension stretch. There was something almost tender in the way he portrayed obsession, as if love, loneliness, and danger were all coming from the same place. That contradiction made him mesmerizing. Walker wasn't the classic alpha, or the smooth-talking rogue. He was something trickier, a man whose vulnerability blurred into menace. You couldn't tell if he wanted to be saved, or if he was luring you into the dark with him. That uncertainty, that feeling of standing on emotional quicksand, gave him a power few actors ever touched. There was beauty in his gentleness, and danger in his charm. And even now, watching him feels like reading a letter that wasn't meant for you, intimate, unnerving, and impossible to put down. The stars we've just seen weren't simply beautiful, they embodied something deeper. Each of them brought their own version of allure to the screen. Quiet strength, raw vulnerability, refined danger, or an elegance that felt just out of reach. They didn't all shout for attention, many whispered, and somehow, that made them even more powerful. What connects them isn't just how they looked, but how they made people feel. Their performances left a mark. A lingering stare. A single line. A moment of stillness. Decades later, those moments remain, not because of fame or spectacle, but because of presence. Old Hollywood had many stars, but the ones who stayed with us the longest often weren't the loudest. They were the ones who made us pause. The ones who made us lean in. And whether their names are etched into history or whispered by devoted fans, their impact is undeniable. If one of these stars surprised you, stayed with you, or sparked something, let us know in the comments. Who would you add to the list? Who haunts your screen even now? If you enjoyed this journey into old Hollywood's most captivating faces and stories, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with others who love film the way you do. We have more to come and more legends to uncover. Thanks for watching and for keeping the flame alive.